Her dedication and devotion as sovereign never wavered. Through times of change and progress,
The sky over London was gloomy, with the calm weight of grief. Black-clad crowds lined the Mall as Westminster's bells tolled solemnly. King Charles III was gone. The United Kingdom, still reeling from the Queen's death only years ago, was now facing yet another cataclysmic transition in its monarchy. But beyond the royal doors, something far more important was taking place than formal tributes and carefully crafted news releases. A murmur began to spread, first within the walls of Windsor, then among the senior royals. And at the center of it all stood a woman who had never sought power or made headlines, Princess Anne. It was not a speech. It was not a press conference. It was a single envelope sealed with the dying king's crest, handwritten and dated only weeks before his death. The contents of the packet would shatter preconceived notions, restructure royal power lines, and destabilize the very throne Charles had just recently inherited. For decades, royal tradition had painted the root of succession with gold and assurance. But beneath the gilded facade, Charles could see the cracks, scandals, betrayals, dwindling public trust, and mounting cries for a republic. And in his last days, the king understood one thing with absolute certainty. The crown could no longer tolerate ambiguity. He made a decision, a daring one, a final one. He entrusted it not to Camilla, his advisors, William, or Harry. He handed it to Anne, his sister who had spent her entire life in the trenches of royal service, never seeking the spotlight and never succumbing to tabloid pandemonium. When the funeral was over and the black veils came off, Anne gathered the important royals in a private drawing room at Windsor. She gripped the envelope as if it were a sacred charge, her expression unreadable. And when she eventually spoke, it wasn't with drama or feeling, but with conviction. "This was our brother's last request. You may not like it, but you will respect it." What ensued would destroy old partnerships while cementing new ones. Camilla would retreat. Harry would become enraged. And William, silent and composed, would stand up not only as heir, but as the man Charles had actually chosen to lead. This was not the plan. It wasn't supposed to be like this. But it did. And from then on, the crown would never be the same. Buckingham Palace served as a palace in waiting during King Charles III's dying months. Behind the marble columns and groomed lawns, reports about the king's failing health circulated among courtiers and senior royals. Though official comments dismissed it as routine fatigue or rest for a vigorous schedule, those closest to him understood otherwise. Charles was exhausted, both physically and spiritually. Years of attempting to rehabilitate a monarchy that many saw as obsolete had worn him down. His long-awaited reign had turned into one of triage rather than victory. He inherited scandal, discord, and a family that was beyond repair. And with each passing day, as his body weakened and his moments of clarity got fewer, the same question gnawed at him. Had he done enough to secure the future of the crown? He didn't believe time would suffice to address the question. So, in his last weeks, Charles summoned his sister, Princess Anne, the only royal who had never wavered, who never required publicity or popular adoration, who saw duty not as a show, but as a silent fight. Anne arrived at Highgrove under the radar, like she often does, sliding past cameras and the public eye. Charles, propped up in a velvet recliner by the window, didn't mince his words. He spoke plainly. He claimed that the monarchy was on the verge of collapse. Harry had become a liability. Camilla's ambitions were becoming louder. The people were agitated. And while he had formerly believed in waiting for nature to take its course, he now saw hesitancy as a luxury that the crown could not afford. "They believe I will leave it to the council, or tradition, or fate," he replied. "But if I do, we risk losing everything." What followed was not a formal royal decree. This was a letter, handwritten, private, final. It contained no official seals or council signatures, but something far more powerful: Charles's personal seal and final request. In it, he declared William not just heir, but monarch in all but name. A clear endorsement that went beyond lineage to command. He said that William had earned the people's trust, carried himself with dignity, and, most crucially, navigated a chaotic family while never losing sight of his mother's legacy. But the letter also included a caution, one that surprised even Anne. Charles raised serious worries about Harry's judgment and Meghan's intentions. He felt that allowing them back into the fold would cause lasting damage to the monarchy's reputation, especially if Charles was no longer available to mediate. In possibly the most incisive statement he wrote, "Henry is my son. However, he is no longer the crowned son." Then came the portion that caused waves throughout royal bloodlines. He requested Anne to reveal the letter only when the monarchy's stability was in jeopardy. Not necessarily after his death, but when the future demanded clarity over comfort. It was an unexpected decision from Charles, a man so entrenched in history that he once pondered the modern implications of calling Camilla queen. But death brings honesty, and in those dying days, Charles finally ceased playing the role of king and became the institution's custodian. Anne accepted the charge, not with joy, not even with resolve, but with the somber realization that she had just received the most delicate grenade in royal history. When she left Highgrove that day, she didn't talk to anybody, not even her own kids. She carried the letter in a closed case and stored it in the royal family's confidential archive, which was only available to her. Weeks later, Charles died in his sleep. The country would mourn, the media would scurry, and official transition plans would begin. However, the fundamental shift in royal power had already begun, with a letter rather than a crown. This is a private choice, a final act of clarification. A dying monarch and his most trusted sister were the only ones who knew the truth. The funeral of King Charles III was a lesson in royal choreography, elegant, controlled, and full of meaning. Black jackets, bowed heads, and orchestrated sadness. But beneath the solemn faces and funeral marches, a storm was gathering. 3 days after the formal farewell, senior royals were summoned to Windsor Castle for what aides described as a private family briefing. Most assumed it was a logistical meeting to discuss estates, ceremonial transfers, and posthumous arrangements. But when Princess Anne entered the room with a small, crested envelope, everything changed. She did not speak right away. Prince William sat next to Kate and kept a close eye on her. Camilla arrived late, her face tense with annoyance. Prince Edward sat near the hearth, brow wrinkled. Harry is clearly absent. He had returned to California with Meghan the morning following the burial, claiming that space was needed. And perhaps on some level, he knew what was coming. Anne held up the envelope. "Prior to his death, the king, our brother, personally sent me this letter. It isn't ceremonial, it's not legal, but this is his final wish, and I plan to respect it." The hush was sudden and terrible. As she unsealed the seal and began reading, the temperature in the room appeared to plummet. Charles's handwriting, even in his infirmity, conveyed a clear and unmistakable message. Prince William would take complete leadership of the monarchy's direction and obligations immediately. There will be no wait, no ambiguity. There was no transition period. Charles believed that the monarchy required power, clarity, and modern leadership. He stated that William exemplified the spirit of duty that once defined this institution, possibly a disguised reference to Diana's influence. But the letter contained more than praise. It included a caution. Charles stated that Harry had rejected the weight of the crown in pursuit of personal liberty. Despite his love for his younger son, Charles could no longer entrust him with the responsibilities or risks of royal life. He warned that any attempt to reintegrate Harry or Meghan into the inner circle would jeopardize the remaining harmony. Camilla, for her part, received little attention. No titles, no roles, only one line: "Let the future be decided by those born to lead it," a deliberate statement with a catastrophic omission. When Anne finished reading, she glanced up, not with satisfaction, but with solemn assurance. "My brother knew what had to be done," she told me. "He loved each of us in his own way, but he loved the crown more." Camilla reportedly rose from her seat, walked to the far end of the room, and stood silently. Edward appeared stunned but did not respond. William, as silent as ever, nodded once. He did not look at anyone else. Just look at Anne, then look at Kate. There were no crowns or proclamations at that moment, but power had changed hands. Anne, once the most neglected royal, had just revealed the monarchy's most shocking truth. Not through ambition, not through drama. However, this is done on duty. The kind of obligation that would make her father proud. Only Charles understood the true meaning of loyalty. And now, as the world moved forward, it would do so under a new shadow. William's, not as heir apparent, but as the guy his father had chosen. If the royal family is a stronghold, Camilla has spent decades clawing her way in. From the dark beginnings of a contentious affair to eventually donning the crown as queen consort, hers was the most unlikely royal rise of the modern period. She had braved public hostility, Diana's ghost, and tabloid mocking to sit beside King Charles on the throne. But in one letter, everything she had fought for crashed under her feet. Camilla's carefully maintained composure shattered as Princess Anne concluded reciting Charles' final wish. Her lips stiffened, her jaw was fixed. But her eyes, which had stared down both reporters and royals, conveyed the truth. She felt humiliated, and she was outraged. According to an insider during the meeting, Camilla mumbled almost to herself, "This was never supposed to be her throne." She, of course, is Kate Middleton. Although not specifically stated in Charles's letter, the implications were evident. William would take the lead. Catherine, too, would accompany him. Not Camilla. Not the woman who stood by Charles during his reign. Not the woman who believed she had paid the price for her position in the royal family. Especially not the woman who had been officially crowned just months before. Camilla walked out of the meeting room before the debate could begin. A senior aide followed her down the corridor, only to be met with a raised hand and the following words: "Leave me." Camilla reportedly erupted in her own rooms. The queen consort, formerly a master of controlled glances and cunning grins, screamed, cried, and slammed a crystal vase against the wall, breaking it into splinters. A dying man and his sister had just undone decades of work to preserve her legacy. She did not blame Charles, not entirely. She blamed Anne for delivering the hit. She blamed Kate for sitting passively while the power slipped to her lap. Above all, she blamed Diana's legacy, the ghost that had followed her ascent and now, even in death, recaptured the kingdom via her son and his bride. Behind closed doors, Camilla reportedly said, "I sacrificed everything for him, my dignity and my peace. I've waited in the shadows for decades, and this is how it ends." Camilla disappeared from public notice in the days after her disclosure. No statements, no appearances, no press briefings. Royal aides informed the media that she was grieving privately, but some inside Clarence House knew otherwise. Camilla was not weeping for Charles. She was lamenting her power. For years, she had walked a tightrope, portraying the faithful wife, the modern queen, and the grandmotherly figure in contrast to Meghan's disobedience. But behind the surface, Camilla had always desired more. Not only accepted, but enthroned. And for a moment, it appeared like she had finally triumphed. Until the king's final deed tore the crown from her head without touching it. Camilla's future is now uncertain, with William prepared to take the lead and Kate gradually gaining public favor. She may still hold the title, but her power is ebbing quickly. Because when Charles chose Anne to speak his dying words, he did not simply leave a message. He drew a line. And on one side of the queue stood a woman who had been mistress, wife, and queen. But what about the opposite side? The future? Camilla wasn't in it. There were no gold thrones. There is no broadcast celebration. There is no sweeping orchestral score reverberating across Westminster Abbey. However, those who recognized true power were aware of what had occurred. Prince William had assumed the role of monarch, not with a crown on his head, but with the entire weight of a dying king's will lying on his shoulders. It was designed to be a silent coronation. Buckingham Palace was placed under lockdown in the days after Princess Anne's announcement. Behind the iron gates, talks were held at lightning speed. William, serene as ever, did not rush the transition, but neither did he postpone it. The monarchy, he realized, could not afford a power vacuum. Not now. Not with the public watching and Camilla retreating. The Privy Council gathered in hushed chambers. Legal advisors examined the late king's desires. And while Charles's letter carried no legal weight, its political impact was apparent. The tone, the timing, the clarity. No one questioned the intention. The crown was no longer suspended over William's head. It had already been established there. According to sources close to the royal household, William immediately assumed charge of operations traditionally designated for the sovereign. He began signing documents with the quiet authority of a king-in-waiting who was no longer waiting, rather than as the Prince of Wales. He requested private briefings from military advisors, diplomats, and church authorities. Not for show, not for drama. His father, however, had left him to discreetly begin steering the ship. Perhaps most symbolically, he pulled Kate closer than ever before. For years, Catherine had portrayed the poised consort, the smiling supporter, and the queen of quiet elegance. However, in the days following Charles's death, something changed. Her appearances became fewer, but when she did appear, she was more regal than ever. Her posture is straighter. Her words are more measured. She was no longer preparing for her job. She was living it. Insiders say William held lengthy closed-door meetings with Anne, Edward, and even Princess Beatrice, forming a new royal inner circle handpicked for devotion and stability. The emphasis was no longer on bloodline or pomp. It focused on repairing trust, modernizing leadership, and preserving the legacy that Charles had attempted, but ultimately failed, to establish. And Camilla? She was nowhere to be found. Though she held the title of Queen Consort, she was largely ignored. Her pleas for public appearances were quietly declined. Her advisors trimmed back. Those who had once sought her favor began to move their loyalties elsewhere. Because in the royal ecology, nothing shouts louder than quiet. And William's quiet was tremendous. Even the press, which is notorious for conjecture and scandal, took a cautious approach. There weren't any tabloids yelling "King William" just yet, but every headline, photo, and insider statement led to the same reality. The youngster who had previously marched behind his mother's coffin was now the one bringing the crown forward. Not just because Charles died, but Charles had chosen him. And in the palace's darkest hallways, where true power shifts are whispered, everyone knew the truth. This was not the start of William's reign. It was the continuation of Diana's legacy, which could only be fulfilled by her son. Without a crown, without a throne, but with command, clarity, and the quiet authority of a true ruler. They'd seen him grow up, awkward and heartbroken, marching slowly behind his mother's coffin, the weight of the world in his eyes. The public had mourned with him, aged alongside him, and wished for him. And today, as the nation digested the gentle tremor of King Charles's last wish, one sentiment resonated throughout social media, newspaper columns, and dinner tables. William is the king Diana raised. It was not a formal coronation, but it didn't have to be. From Birmingham streets to Brighton's cafes, from Scotland to Cornwall, Britain sensed a shift. The monarchy had just been through a tumultuous decade with scandals, fractures, Meghan and Harry's departure, Andrew's humiliation, and Camilla's dubious reception. Many had begun to question if the institution was even worth saving. What about now? They saw hope, not in the throne, but in the guy standing next to it. When Princess Anne disclosed King Charles's final desire, it did not feel like favoritism. It felt like clarity. The people had long regarded Anne for her no-nonsense dedication to duty, so if she was the one delivering the word, it had to be real. The message was simple: William is in control of his future. Polls spiked virtually overnight. Public trust in the monarchy, which had been dangerously low throughout the latter years of Charles's reign, increased by about 20% in the first 72 hours after the letter was revealed. William and Kate were trending worldwide, with hashtags like #KingWilliamNow, #Diana'sLegacy, and #RightfulHeir taking over Twitter and TikTok. In interviews around the UK, senior citizens saw it as a full-circle moment. Younger generations, who had grown disillusioned with the crown, found themselves curiously sentimental. One popular video shows a Generation Z Londoner saying, "I do not even like the monarchy, but if anyone was going to restore meaning to it, it was William. He is not his father, he is his mother's son." That mattered. Diana was never really forgotten. In many respects, she remained more strong in memory than Charles had been in life. And now, her spirit, her compassion, sense of justice, and defiance of antiquated norms seemed to live on in the guy who wore her loss as armor. Not everyone rejoiced. Pro-Republic factions continued to agitate for the abolition of the monarchy. Camilla's decreasing number of followers screamed foul. Harry and Meghan's supporters alleged that William had stolen the crown through secret deals. However, their voices were drowned out by a far louder fact. William did not steal anything. He deserved it. By walking the line between tradition and change, by defending his family's honor while others went for the cameras, by serving without fanfare, speaking without scandal, and shouldering the emotional load that his father could never remove. He wasn't only the heir by blood, he was the heir spiritually. And now, with Princess Anne's support and the people's approval, he had become what the country urgently needed, an anchor amid a sea of royal instability. He did not beg for it, he did not force it, he was just chosen. By Charles, by Anne, by Britain, and at that silent coronation, amid all the anguish and fractured loyalties, one reality remained undeniable. Princess Diana's greatest legacy was wearing the crown. In the end, it wasn't a royal decree, a golden orb, or a big coronation that changed the course of the monarchy. It was a father's ultimate deed, given in silence, sealed in ink, and addressed by the nation's most trusted woman, Princess Anne. Despite his shortcomings and failures, King Charles recognized the true meaning of legacy in his later years. He'd spent decades pursuing acceptance, battling ghosts, and striving to navigate a monarchy that was frequently drowning under the weight of its own tradition. But when it came time to make a decision, not by law, but by heart, he did not turn to the rigid institutions of the past. He stared at his son, not simply the next in line, but the correct one, Prince William. Diana raised a boy. Britain waited for this man. People already believed in the king. And by making that decision, Charles may have unintentionally achieved a long-buried dream with Diana. She had always envisioned a monarchy of compassion, courage, and modern grace. She wanted her boys to lead with love rather than fear. She believed in change, in shattering the frigid customs that had made the royals untouchable. And though she never lived to see it, the road she built in resistance is the same one William now leads. The crown no longer feels like an imperial relic or a sign of unrivaled authority. In William's hands, it feels more human, grounded, real, rooted in loss, but blooming with resolve. Camilla may still keep her title, Harry may still rant from across the seas, and the palace may never openly discuss what transpired inside the Windsor walls. People are aware, however. They notice the shift. They sense the difference. And they recognize the modest monarch who never required a crown to demonstrate his worth. Charles's last wish was unexpected, but it was powerful. And now, with William moving forward and Kate by his side, a new era begins. Not only for the monarchy, but also for the memories of a mother who never gave up fighting for her son's future. The throne has been recovered. This time it's about Diana's legacy.